great pleasure to welcome you to the first in the Gannawarra Conversation Series webinars. I just want to start off by acknowledging that our work in our community happens on the country of the traditional owners of the area, the people of the Barapa Barapa, Wamba Wamba, Yorta Yorta and Dja Dja Wurrung, and acknowledge their ancestors who have been custodians of this land for thousands of years. We acknowledge and pay our respects to elders, their elders, past, present and emerging, and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I am a resident of the Gannawarra Shire and I have been here for about 25 years, I think, living in Kahuna. I have a lovely partner and we're ex-dairy farmers, and I have three pretty ace children most of the time. I'm president of the Leachville Gunbound Netball Club and I'm also the CEO of Northern District Community Health. And I really am pleased to see all your wonderful faces across this big screen tonight. So thank you all for coming out on a Monday night. Tonight came about because I was feeling a bit concerned about the impact on our community from some of the challenges that we've been facing together. We've been facing drought, the cost of water, and then throw in a bit of a pandemic with COVID. And upon talking to colleagues and friends, I found that they too were feeling pretty similarly to me. So what do you do when you have a little crisis? You ring somebody who you think's going to help. And I rang christinekotur. And I'll introduce you to Chris in a minute. But first of all, what I said was, you know, how do we actually build hope and strengthen our community in times like these? How do we get through 2020 and out the other side whole? How do we follow the words of the American politician Rahm Emanuel? You never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. So how do we get through 2020 and out the other side? The big question. So Chris, over to Chris. I know Chris because I attended a leadership course when I used to work at the council through local government professionals called XLP. Chris provides expert professional services in the field of strategy, governance, leadership development, complex inquiries, reviews and facilitation. She is a highly regarded independent chair, company director and strategic advisor to CEOs, senior executives, board chairs, directors, councillors and committees, and of late, me. Chris has worked with leaders in our region before and is currently working with communities to help people out and through this current health and economic crisis affecting all Victorians. Chris is an absolutely outstanding presenter whose experience with and learnings from government inquiries and 3 royal commissions has earned her immense respect. And Chris is a Leadership Victoria's leader in residence. So Chris had done some leadership webinars in the Wimmera area, and so she suggested I contacted them. And so I did that, and it sounded really like something we could do. Then we called on some amazing locals to give us a bit of real, you know, not just the word according to Mandy, to get some real life experience and thoughts. And they included Angela Hurd, Geraldine Prendergast, Bryan Goebel, Matt Hawken, Laura O'Dwyer, Jason Hensley. And then I also had Tanya Marchese from my team and Narelle O'Donoghue and Stacey Williams from the Gannawarra Shire. And together we co-designed tonight. So what that involved also was inviting Bryan Goebel, who grew up on a dairy farm. I hope I'm right there, Bryan.
Yeah.
Yep. And then developed a walnut farm and now is growing in a growing plumbing business over in Kundruk Barron. He's also the chair of the Kundruk Development Committee, where they've had some huge success with nature-based tourism. So Bryan has a great story to tell. And one of the things that our little group decided was it was really important to have the voice of some success in our local community to remind us what's possible. And that's why Bryan's going to talk to us tonight as well. I also just want to acknowledge the Gannawarra Resilience Committee, with whom prior to COVID, we'd been discussing community leadership. And because of COVID, we sort of put things on hold, and then it sort of kept raising its head. And so I was very pleased that the Shire, through the Resilience Committee, were able to provide some funding to put on tonight through the federal government's Drought Communities program. So I hope the potential destination of our conversation tonight For all of you will be some tools and ideas to support each other, each of you on your own journey, and potentially it inspires more conversations that support and strengthen the life of our lovely community here across the Gannawarra Shire. So first up though, I'm going to hand over now to Chris, and then she's going to hand over to Bryan, and we're going to listen deeply for a little while. So thank you again for joining us, and over to you, Chris.
Thank you, and Mandy, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and I'm looking forward to spending a bit more time, Bryan, with you as my colleague and mate on this particular evening. So I wouldn't want to be anywhere else on a Monday night. So hello from Melbourne, by the way, just in case you want to make me feel jealous by telling me what sort of a time you're having at the moment that I'm not having. So let me first confess that I fell in love with your community through very difficult times. Neil Comrie and I were part of a review into the floods that I'm sure most of you can remember, and we took a little plane over your area for most of our consultations. But the reason I really fell in love was because I was able to talk to any number of people in your community, and I could see what resilience and what recovery and what forward planning actually looked like. So I think I'm really lucky to be invited back again, and I might just share with you a couple of examples from around the state. From what I know of you, you could teach me more than I'm likely to be able to pass on to you. But let me just share some thoughts, because I hope that at the end of this, I actually hope that at the end of this you say, oh, there's nothing new there. And I hope you say that because you're already doing the work. Then my challenge would be, how do you actually expand that work? How do you make it stronger? How do you make it more vibrant? How do you bring in more people? And how do you put more juice into the ideas that you've gotten, that you're running with? So let me just take you through a few thoughts that I've got. And I should just say that I because of the work that I do, have worked with a number of communities around Victoria. I do that all the time. Having worked with 3 Royal Commissions, including the current Royal Commission into Mental Health, I guess I have seen parts of Victoria suffering through some of the worst examples of what people deal with in their lives. So I've worked with the Bushfires Royal Commission in 2009, the Family Violence Royal Commission, and currently the Mental Health Royal Commission. So I'm just going to roll together what I think are some of those stories without identifying any of them. I think that my reason for doing this work is because I have a huge amount of hope and confidence in communities being able to chart their own course for the future and gather people around ideas. I can see the force of being hopeful and confident, and I can tell you, though I won't name them, that I've worked in a number of communities where I see that people are pretty much on their knees, and as a community are thinking about decline rather than growth. So I think I know just a little bit about some of the differences in those community settings, and I guess what works and what might not. So I'll just go through a few of those things. I think there's something about a group of people like we've got on the screen at the moment, and people that you know, that understand that you coming up with ideas isn't that difficult. It's actually gathering people around the idea and turning it into action that's the really significant part of that particular work. We might have had a Royal Commission into family violence without Rosie Batty. But after that day when Rosie Batty, and I won't go through the whole story, but if you have any recollection of seeing Rosie on your screens at the end of that day after she had lost her son and husband, there was no doubt that there was an idea, the time of which had arrived. In other words, something significant had to happen. Sometimes the story about the future turns on one person's experience, but more often than not, the ideas come from people who are willing to say, there's a problem and we need to fix it. There's a particular need and we have to do something about it. There's an opportunity. We better jump on that. Or right now, I can see a lot of people in communities thinking about what do we do to adapt to life after a pandemic. And in other parts of Victoria where I've worked, there are waves of trauma. Like how do we haven't even got over a bushfire. We haven't even got over last summer. And now we've got COVID. So how do we work? How do we think about resilience? How do we work as a community? Are we going to let this beat us, or are we going to do something about that ourselves? And you're probably aware of the story in Colac during September where, and I was really taken with this story where, I'll tell you about this. Rather than counting on the state government to trace every coronavirus infection, the people in Colac trusted their community to do the work faster and better. One of the really important lessons for me about this form of community leadership is that these are people who don't wait. They don't wait for the state government or Canberra or some other authority or someone down the road to come along and make something happen. They actually work together to go from an idea into action themselves. And I'm enormously impressed with your own community's resilience action plan. If you've already got more than 20, perhaps nearly 30 agencies involved in that, that is quite extraordinary. So there's something really good going on there. And I think it's worth pressing on it just a little further. And perhaps a couple of things to say about this that might make a big difference. When I listen to community leaders talk, they use the word we a lot. They don't use I or me quite so much. And I think that's always very telling because right from the very start, they're about to have a conversation that's about the us rather than one particular individual. They don't outsource the work of going from an idea into action. They're prepared to do it as us. In other words, to do it together. They do something else that I think is really special. And where I've seen this work in communities, how to describe this? They don't rely on somebody with a big job or somebody who's the boss or the CEO or somebody who's got a whopping great organisation in behind them. In fact, a lot of the people that I can think of might not even be employed, not in charge of anything necessarily. They don't have special training. They don't have special equipment. They don't have piles of money. They don't have authority that comes from a uniform or the symbols of power or position. They just get up and do it. And I find this extraordinary when, and it has happened in every community that I've been in around the state, particularly communities under deep stress, where I can only describe this almost as pop-up leadership, where there are people that step forward and it's not their job and nobody voted for them, nobody waited for them. They just move into the space of going from an idea into action. And they do an extraordinary thing, which is, maybe they don't need special training, but maybe they use a little bit of magic, but that's not really advice. I don't think they do that. Maybe they do. But they actually gather a whole lot of other people around them. Not because they've got a powerful job or a big position, or because people are frightened of them, because unless they do as they're told, there'll be consequences. They don't lead out of fear. They talk to people about the worth of an idea, and they are persuaders and they're storytellers. And they get their authority from other people because they're worth following. And that is probably the most important thing. In other words, and you probably know who they are when you think about your own community, that you would be prepared to back them and to turn up and to say yes, because you're hearing that from people who are worth following. And once you've got those people in the community, and sometimes they're not there for the long haul, sometimes they're only there for a moment, but you've got the most extraordinary powerful resource that I've been able to see around the state. In other words, their character matters more than their position. Other people think that they're okay. And I don't want to sort of go on about the word trust, but Trust is perishable, in my experience, and people need to earn it and then hold on to it really tightly. And you can spend many, many years earning people's trust and growing your reputation, and you can lose it in a second. And I think there's something about trust which sounds really abstract, I know that, but if you think about who it is that you trust in the community right now, it may be somebody who's got a position in an organisation, but it may be someone who just is, who go about their lives, but in whom you would be prepared to invest trust. And I can tell you that I've worked for and with so many politicians of all different coloured stripes, and if they could find this and cultivate it and hang on to it forever, that would just be extraordinary. But there's always a really thin membrane between trust and not trusting somebody. So I think one of the character traits of community leaders is that people trust them. And that's incredibly important. Now, what do these people actually do? I think they do a couple of things really, really well. Maybe intuitively, but there's also some structure in the way they go about this. Firstly, they don't pursue this idea of kind of one grand heroic leader. The person who kind of rides into town and solves all the problems and says, hand it all to me, I'm here to fix it. They realise that they need to gather others around an idea. And you see, up on the screen now is an example of it. You see, Mandy's right, we did have a telephone conversation, but I've not really had an active role in gathering all the people that you see on the screen and who you'll be talking to tomorrow and the day after and the day after that about tonight and what might be possible up ahead. You see, Mandy tells you a story, activates her network, and you say yes. Now, I'm not going to go into that as a case study, but it's there. And that is the person who can surround their effort with the intentions and the work of other people who are prepared to turn up and trust them. And that's an extraordinarily important thing. The next thing I think these people do is that they understand more than anybody that I know that healthy relationships are the lifeblood of a community. It's the glue, it's the connections, it's what keeps people together or apart. And I can think of a number of communities, and I'm sad about this, and I continue to work with them, who are broken, who are fragmented, where people spend more time infighting and trying to protect their own space and about protecting the small areas rather than about protecting the whole community. And they know that they're not necessarily in great shape, but they don't quite know what to do about that. So there's something about these people that I'm thinking of that understand that healthy relationships are the lifeblood and the oxygen of community health. Relationships can fall into disrepair, and if you let that go, your ideas will just slip through your fingers like sand. A couple of other things that I think these community leaders do, and that is that they actually have a plan, or they get others involved in planning. And it might not be perfect, but they get going and they keep going based on having a common view about what's up ahead and what's worthwhile. And it's sometimes not about technical skills and about expertise. So sometimes I think that's really helpful. But the plan shows them what the skills are and the stuff that they need in order to go from an idea into action. So they involve other planners. They do get experts in, they get technical advice when they need it, they find volunteers, they seek out mentors, they are doers. And when they're too tired or exhausted, fatigued, or their interest drops, they know that they need to fetch up fresh doers. So they keep replenishing the people who are prepared to be community leaders. And they come up with all sorts of marvellous things when I think about just the last couple of weeks. There are people who volunteer a space or a place to have a meeting. There's an act of community leadership. They get on social media. They are journalists in inverted commas because the local papers have become extinct. They gather data and they do some research, and that's super, super important, because at some stage, if you've got an idea, you're probably going to have to convince somebody outside the community that it's worth doing. So you're probably going to need some data and some evidence, and you need to be able to demonstrate a need. And there are a number of other things that I think they do. If they can't open a door, they find people who can. If they can't make a phone call to somebody who's got some influence, they find people who can. And the last thing I think that they're pretty damn good at is they have fun. They actually bring lightness into people's experience rather than gloom and difficulty. And I can't tell you the number of times, particularly in the Mental Health Royal Commission, and these have been public meetings, so I'm not sharing anything confidential, but people's longing for some escape from a whole litany, a whole list of how difficult everything is, how hard it is, what a struggle everything is, because there's plenty of that. And so when I say fun, I simply mean people who can introduce some lightness into the conversation and understand the power of laughter, which is a very corny thing to say, but to watch the mood of individuals change from the kind of sagging, spirited, everything's hard attitude to just smile for a moment is quite extraordinary. And I've never underestimated the power of people who can bring lightness and positivity. And I try to be one of those. I think that I'm an optimist, which is hard these days, and living in Melbourne, but I'm an optimist who worries a lot. So I think it is possible to have some serious elements to what it is that you do, but to never lose sight of lightness and being able to offer people something that's constructive and a conversation away from the gloom, which is almost the way we just tend to be naturally. So I'm just going to say one other point that I'd like to make, because I really want to hear from Bryan, because I'm here in Melbourne and I've got maybe a big picture of what goes on with community leadership, and I guess some of my own thoughts and views about that, but I really want to hear from someone who's thought about that and done that in your own community. Let me just tell you of an experience when I did work in the minister's office, which I've never forgotten. And I found that there were 3 ways of attracting attention in a minister's office. Now, remember that I'm talking about, and people in Shepparton who've just got their rail link announced today will tell you something about this. The number of times you need to take your conversation to someone else to get that idea to happen. There'd be a number of times when we thought about how you'd get attention from a minister or higher office. Let me just say higher office. And it's only higher office because that's often where the money is or where the policy sits, or where you can be blocked and put out of action. So one way of doing that is to do something really, really terrible, like really, really stupid, really, really dumb, and then get somebody to capture that on video. Like, you know, something really just like that you would be deeply ashamed of. And it seemed all right at the moment, but afterwards, oh my gosh. That's one way of getting attention. I say very, very quickly that I don't recommend that one. You'll certainly get attention, but maybe not the sort you want. So that's one way. The other is to turn up like everybody else does and ask for something. Now, when you're in a minister's office, this goes on all the time. And you've got a minister saying, well, who's next? And you go, well, it's so-and-so. And they go, oh, well, I know what they want, because they're here all the time asking for the same thing. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, except that in that space, you're competing with everybody else. There's nothing that stands out necessarily, because it can come across as, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but it can just come across as the same old, same old, same old. Why this time? Like, why if we've already said no, or wait till the next budget or after the next election? What changes this time? Why you and why now? There's nothing wrong with that, except it's a hard ask. It's hard to push your way through. The third way of getting attention, I found the most arresting, because and this is really what I'm thinking about for community leadership, and it's the message that I'll get you to think about. We would have a group of people arrive who had already worked out that they were going to be partners around this particular proposal, even though many of them were competitors and rivals, even though they were not naturally cousins. They weren't even working in the same sector, but they had done the homework of making the connections and joining up before they turned up with their idea. And not only that, this was always really impressive. They weren't necessarily asking for extra resources, though sometimes they were. They were asking for support. Quite often it was money, that's true. But they were able to do something extraordinarily special. They were able to give us in the Minister's office solutions to problems we hadn't even thought of. Now that's worth something. And it would be on those occasions that the Minister would say, now you get their phone number and ring them back, because that's an idea that we want to jump on. And I understand all about the politics that goes along with that, but it's worth doing. So the lessons in that are come as a group, join up, partnerships and collaborations who have done their homework are incredibly arresting. They're incredibly captivating, and they are very, very persuasive. And then the next thing is, maybe it's the turnaround of a mood too. It's not necessarily coming in here and saying, oh, we've got another problem. It's actually coming with maybe a problem, but the conversation is based on solutions, not on stacking more problems in front of the listener. And I know that I'm now talking about a political domain, but I think that there's something in that that's really worth thinking about. Networks are incredibly powerful. Collaborations are incredibly powerful. Collaborations and partnerships between agencies, organisations and groups that would not otherwise join up are incredibly powerful. And people who know the community from inside out are just really beguiling because they tell their story, and there's nothing more persuasive than someone who's had that experience on the ground and can talk about it as a positive experience without coming in and contributing to a bleak future. So I'll just go back to what I said at the start, that this is about a story that tells something really positive about a future that is confident and hopeful from a community that can see where it's going, and it's going to a good place. Now, I know that I've nibbled a bit of time away from Bryan's session, and I'm going to apologise about that in advance, but I'm also really happy if you pop into the chat site any questions or comments that we can come back and have a look at either today if we've got time, or maybe the other side of it. And I know that Mandy's really, really keen, as her group of colleagues and friends are, to see if there's anything that you might say to us tonight that can actually shape where these conversations might go to in future. So help us understand what that might be. But Bryan, I'm just going to hop out of your way, because I think your story, and I had the great pleasure of meeting you the other day, was really extraordinary, and I found very interesting and captivating, and I kept thinking about it later on. So what I'd like to do is to step out of the way and ask Bryan to take the screen, and then we'll have some breakout groups, because I'd really love to know what you'd all now, after you've heard a little bit from me and maybe a bit more from Bryan, just like to do with what you've heard. So Bryan, can I hand the screen over to you, and thank you in advance for making a contribution tonight, because I know that I've already learned a lot just by listening to you. So over to you, Bryan.
Sorry,
Thanks, Chris.
Bryan, just really quickly before you start, just a quick technique. If anyone is in the chat, they would have already seen what I did forget to share with you at the start. To get into speaker view, there is a little spot on the top of your screen, which allows you to see Bryan and Chris as large screens rather than seeing the whole gallery of people on tonight. So if you want to be able to see Chris and Bryan in detail, just click on change from gallery view to speaker view up in the top right hand of your screen.
In detail, I haven't had a haircut for about a year, which just means that it feels like I've got a nest of weasels living on my head. So don't worry, don't fret about the detail. Look at Bryan. Bryan's much more interesting.
We want to see Bryan. And just to reiterate what Chris said, a few of us have already started in the chat. Please join us if you've got ideas, thoughts, some of the key things that you're taking away from both Chris's and Bryan's conversations, as well as any questions you've got for both speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. You've got here, I don't have it, so it makes a difference. Probably want to keep it on small screen for me. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks very much for the introduction. It's a difficult one, this, to summarise my role in this community, because it isn't me, as Chris has indicated, that I'm very focused on the we, the us, the community, the development committees, the committees and stuff like that. And that's really was reiterated with what Chris said before. I'm very focused on that. But, and I don't want to, I want to reinforce what Chris was suggesting as what her experiences are with community groups and that, because it's, listening to it, I think most people involved in this webinar are heavily involved in community groups and would reflect or be able to identify someone, if not everyone, within their committees who match or fit. The names are different, the faces are different, but their importance to the community are all very similar. And I'll give you a bit of my background. Yes, I grew up on a dairy farm here. I did my trade as a plumber in Kerrang, so locally. I then moved to the Northern Territory, where I was a policeman for 12 years and mainly worked remote communities. And I suppose the reason I'm giving you this background is I've learned a lot of abilities and skills working with lack of resources, remote locations, working with limited resources, both physical and human. Some communities we lived were 400 k's from our closest town. So we had 12, in this case, Europeans live in a community of 400 people. So we become part of the community. And that's where I think that whatever role you fill, and especially a policeman, you weren't a policeman in the community. So we did have a uniform, but the uniform became just a identification rather than we would become part of the community. So we weren't authoritative, although we had a responsibility there. You had to become part of the community because remoteness taught you that. I spent 5.5, 6 years remote Aboriginal communities, and then I spent quite a few years as a detective covering an area about 1.5 times the size of Victoria. Worked in very hostile situations, worked remote locations, a lot of travelling, worked with limited resources. So I have a lot of skills and backgrounds in working with little resources, getting the best out of people who are on hand. And I suppose I've carried a lot of those skills with me when I come back to Kundruk. I got promoted and I was sitting behind a desk, and I didn't want to spend the next 12 years or 20, 30 years of my life sitting behind a desk. So we moved back to our family property, and as Mandy mentioned before, we developed a walnut orchard, and I started plumbing 1 day a week, and now I've got 6 staff. So, but that's just a quick of my background. The reason I want to touch on the territory aspect was purely the fact of I have had experience in working with limited or no resources, trying to achieve big outcomes with often no costs involved, but purely personal inputs by others who I may have known, I might not have known. It might have been someone I locked up the week before, but they're backing you up the week after the road accident, helping you out in a remote location. Things like that your role often involve conflict, but it also develop relationships as well. And funny enough, I still go to the territory and I still run into people that I dealt with at a policeman's level, but still come up and shake your hand and sometimes buy you a beer. So probably we're touching on the conflict within communities. It doesn't matter what role you play within community groups. There'll be conflict. There'll be people who don't like the way you manage, the way your decisions you make, and I think we'll all have experiences like that. So, but my experience there was that you try to make every negative experience a positive one, and most of the times you do come out, if not probably 80% of the time. My involvement in Kundruk Development Committee started 15 years ago. A couple of well-known identities. At this stage, Don Harris, who was the Mayor of Gannawarra Shire, very respected person within the whole Shire, and Jeff Mole approached me to be involved. They were basically canvassing community members which is really what this group's about now, identifying leaders within the community, identifying people who can contribute. And if you sit back and ask and put a letter in the paper or something, it's human nature to sit back and go, ask someone else to do it. So sometimes you've just got to tap someone on the shoulder and say, right, so my involvement was 15 years ago, and there we go. Become president pretty well the first year, and I've continued that role for till now. So what did Kundruk Development, at this stage, Kundruk was just sneaking along, plodding along and doing quite well, but it isn't the town it is now. And a group of us got together, a larger group, and we really, if you want to call it big bits of paper, I mean, you paid consultants a large amount of money, but we just sat down together over a couple of beers and we sat down and said, where do we see Kundruk? And what are our assets? You know, obviously agriculture is a major investment around here, but you know, we had a Molan's old shed, which is a good shed, and we're all aware of that, and it was in the middle of town. So first thing we identified was a theme. And Kundruk, and I'll push Kundruk because this is what we want to focus on tonight, but Kuna has the same, Kerang has the same, Quambatook has the same. Everyone has a theme within the community. You've just got to identify it. Murrumbett's doing very well with the market and those sort of things, and it's really done well there. But we had a theme. We had the paddle steamers, we had the red gum industry, we had agriculture, we had the railway. So we had all these themes, and we wanted to be very conscious that we didn't focus on one, but we wanted all of these themes, all these subjects to complement each other and reinforce each other. So we had multiple themes, but heading in one arrow direction. And that was 15 years ago, or 13 to 15 years ago, and we've sort of stuck to that plan. Another thing that we've always looked at is we want to develop assets that don't become a liability to the community, because while we have a community group that's enthusiastic, we'll have a community group that have particular skills bases within its members at that time, they may not be there the next year, or the year after, or the year after. So we've always attempted to develop assets to the community that are not a liability to the community members. So with that theme, or that maintaining that what we're trying to achieve is we had to develop partnerships. And obviously the obvious one is Gannawarra Shire. And certainly my time with Gannawarra Shire, we've had very, very supportive CEOs and staff members. And lucky, a lot of them are still Shire staff from when I first started and Kundruk Development started to get moving again. So we've always developed a relationship with obviously council, and council then developed relationships and with us, with RDV and other funding bodies, which we've been very, very lucky to tap into. Another main strategy we always tried to achieve was we tried to have the projects either designed, thought of, not always costed, but the concept idea well before the funding opportunities arose. So when the funding comes up, and quite often the opportunities of application are very short, we had it sitting there. It may not be costed, it may not be finally designed, but it was sitting there ready to roll. The wharf, for example, and we're most aware of the wharf. The wharf took 8 or 10 years, I think. Actually, I think it was back in the 80s, the concept was first mooted. But, you know, that was a subject that every time Peter Walsh come to the community, we would say, Peter, this is what we're going to do. And obviously Roseanne was the CEO at the time, you know, or federal members, in this case, John Forrest or Andrew Board, would come along. This is what we're going to do. So we sowed the seed well before the concept was ever finalised. And they're just strategies we've used in place to sell it and almost convince them it's going to go ahead well before it was actually costed, funded or designed. So they're little strategies we've used. So you sell the product before you've actually designed the idea. The glamping's another example. It's something we threw about 5 or 6 years ago with catchment management and the council, and that'll be open very shortly as well. It's just about completed. So that's little strategies we've worked with the community. So partnerships within ourselves, identifying skills within our community, which is what Chris has been touching on, developing relationships with government bodies. We also develop relationships with parks, Catchment Management Association. There's a mooted idea about 10 years ago of a fish ladder. It's just now starting the last few weeks. We've got, correct me if I'm wrong, $2 million for a fish ladder on the Gumbower Creek at the Twin Bridges there. There are ideas that have been thrown around through our group. Another advantage we have as a community is we really only have one group in town that I suppose covers an umbrella of a large number of smaller groups. So, and although we still concentrate on little ticket items because they are sometimes big ticket items, we try to maintain a very broad strategic outlook with the big ticket items because the rest will get dragged along with it. The fish ladder, no, that'll never get up, that'll give up. Now we've got a $2 million project. The glamping, crazy idea. Well, now we've got, I forget the figures, about $1.72 million there in the total structure. And so all these projects are pie in the sky stuff. You get criticised for it. People say it'll never work. More people try to drag you down, but you try to push that negative thoughts aside and you stick with the positive people. So I suppose I'm trying to encompass a lot of the things that Chris have touched on, which really, really encompass nearly, I'd say, any community groups that we've all been involved in. But the way we've done it, and it does work in some communities, it doesn't work in others, is we've always tried to have 2 or 3 projects in front. So we just received funding for an All Abilities Park, which will be a park which will encompass the old hall site in Kundrook, and it'll be able-bodied and for disabled kids as well. Absolute cracker idea. And from what I understand reading the papers, is that they may generate right through the Shire, Cuna and Crang will get them as well. So that's sort of a quick summary of where we are. I'm happy to take questions if there's anything else, Chris. But this sort of gives a quick summary of the way we've approached it. Now, a number of people here within the group tonight will be aware of those. Others I might just sort of reinforce what's already been brought up previously.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Bryan. You saw me jotting things down because just listening to you, I think my IQ has shifted up a couple of digits. I'm very grateful to have been in your company. But just before we go into breakout groups, does anyone have a question or a comment? Because we're going to give you the opportunity to come in on this and really work this through in breakout groups in just a tick. But questions, comments, just wave madly, or Julie's got her eye on the chat site and we can pick those up now.
It's easy.
Come on, people, don't be shy. There are so many amazing people online tonight. Share, ask.
I've got a question, Bryan. My name's Alexia. It was lovely to actually, more than lovely, it was quite insightful to hear what you've got to say tonight. I'm just like, they are big figures. That's a lot of money, which means a lot of work. And you spoke about the skill base of the people in your group. Did you have someone in your group that was particularly good at writing proposals up, or you found like that takes specific kind of work to be able to work it up, like goodwill and getting out there and getting early and staying late? That's more than that. What you've done there is incredible.
Thanks, Alexia, for the question. Look, probably the way we've structured is we've been very lucky. There's been a number of written proposals, but probably the thing I stress that is we've developed relationships with the Shire. So we've always encompassed the Shire as being partners with us. And with that, and Narelle will probably know too, that we've really, the Shire have done an amazing amount of work for us, if not a lot of the work, on the presentation, the preparation, the presentation of the submissions for the funding. So we've developed the concept idea internally. We've developed it in consultation with the Shire staff at whatever level, whether it's engineering or whether it's Roger Griffiths with economic development or whatever. So yes, we've often written letters of concept ideas and such, but a lot of the strategic and preparation and presentation of the submissions have been done within the Shire, and that's why I stress the importance of partnership. Yeah, yes, we could pay for the skill level, we could buy it, but I think by developing but also I think a lot of times we've applied for the money. Sorry, and I say we, in some partnership with the Shire here, to get a consultant, because a lot of the big ticket item funding nowadays requires a consultant's report. So that is then attached to the submission, which gives it legs to move forwards. RDV have also been well aware of our projects at a very embryonic or very infant stage. So they are almost expecting and waiting in anticipation of our projects to come through.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Neville?
Yes, Bryan, you've got, or through your meetings and my involvement there, you had probably 6 or 7 different people that were chasing different projects. How did you achieve that, by getting the right people on the right project, or keeping them interested, and then getting them to come back to the group and telling the group what they're up to?
One of the things I was always, thanks Neville for that. I haven't not come up on my screen, but I saw you before. Yeah, look, you are right. I mean, for the fish ladder, for example, it's taken 10 years to get up and running. The wharf was an 8 or 10 year project from start to finish. One thing I've always stressed is, and again, having a government background, is understanding and then reinforcing to the groups the importance of being patient. Because I think if you're expecting a project like the fish ladder or the glamping or the wharf to occur within your 12-month period, you're kidding yourself. We all know that's not achievable. We all know that some of these government funding processes might be 5 to 7 years. So continually stress the importance of being patient, having the project ready to go, but also keeping them informed. So, yes, it's another 12 months, it's another 6 months. It may be purely within the council that it's not supported by the councillors this year, but it might be supported by the councillors next year for seeding funding, for example. So keeping everyone informed. A lot of those people might come and go. Like a lot of our projects that come to fruition may have been implemented by someone who's no longer been involved for 3 or 4 or 5 years, but you try to keep them involved at a local level. So that's a balance. That's a bit of a be patient, but keep them informed. And yeah, that's the way we try to do it, Neville, anyway. It doesn't always work, but that's why we try.
Bryan, I'm just going to ask you one very short and perhaps quick question from Stacey Williams at Gannawarra Shire about how you can ensure that the Development Committee actually represents the voice of the broader Koondrauk community.
Look, that's always difficult. I suppose you try to get a cross-section of the community that I suppose are exposed to the general comments. You're not going to get always positive. You're going to get negatives. So it's important that, the group, you try to encourage people to be on the group who reflect the broader thing. Try to get someone with rural backgrounds or, we don't try to fit certain portfolios, but there's enough of the people within that group that probably get 70 to 80%. If you get 80% reflection of the community's thoughts, you're doing pretty well. And I believe we do. I think there's a lot of people who make negative comments. That's part of the nature of it. But with that, we try to say, what are they trying to achieve by that? And quite often it's a positive thing out of a negative thing. So you may include that or keep them informed why things can't happen. Not always achievable, but we try to make it happen.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Mandy's waving, and I want to go to breakout groups, but Mandy, do you want to come in with your question?
Bryan said this great story the other night when we were having a chat about when there was members of the community who didn't agree, Bryan, and you had this little meeting. Can you tell us about that?
It actually relates about the project that's happening at the moment regards to the All Abilities Park. And we had a couple of on-site meetings with the consultant, Shire staff, and obviously community members. And because of the difficulty of COVID and the spacing and where we were and all that sort of stuff, a couple of them weren't comfortable that the group, and I talked the collective group that were representing the community on the All Abilities Park, were happy or all in agreement with what was achieved. So what we did was I thought, no. So I said, right, meeting at our office, or my office down the shed, put a few beers on. An hour later, we all come out, everyone was happy. It was a 4-3 vote on preference and everyone walked out happy. It was just purely a case of, you could just sense that not so much there was anger or just people disgruntled, but I wasn't comfortable that everyone was walking out of there completely happy or informed of what we were trying to achieve. We wrote a letter to the Shire of what our recommendations were and everyone's happy. So it was only just a matter of receiving, not always verbal feedback, but just sensing that all the decisions weren't, completely agreed upon, all resolved. So anyway, that was in the last couple of weeks. So
that's a great story. Thank you. Thanks so much. Now, Julie, I'm going to throw to you because we're going to spend a bit of time in smaller groups, and really, I'm going to encourage you to think really through what you've just heard from the two of us, and also from what you know about the community, because we're really looking to really boost action, to really get people thinking about what are the next steps. How do we go about doing this? Was there a particular idea or some sentiment that you really think, boy, now's the time, we really need to be able to shift and move on this? So we're going to suggest, Julie, sort of 15 minutes thereabouts, maybe 20, and then you've got a facilitator in each group. You've also got a scribe so that you don't need to be taking notes. We've got somebody who's going to do that for us. And then we'll do just a very, very light touch report back. I'm not going to ask everybody for every idea because your facilitator and your scribe will have captured all of that. But it would just be terrific for those of us who are not in your group to hear just a bit about perhaps one idea one takeaway that you really think would be a boost. And I hope that what Bryan particularly, but I hope that perhaps I and some of the things that I've said have just given you a big vitamin, and see if we can turn that into action. So Julie, do you want to tell us how we're going to do that?
Yes, so I'm about to press a magical button and send you out into 3 different breakout rooms. We've got Mandy Hutchinson facilitating breakout room 1, and we've got Angela Hurd in breakout room 2 and Geraldine in breakout room 3. So I'm about to press that button. We will come back at 8:15. A minute before that, you will get a warning come up on your screen saying that in 60 seconds, we're going to wrap up and you'll magically be transported back to the big group. So that doesn't mean you just stop talking. It means you've got a minute to wrap up your conversations and maybe work out exactly what that one idea is that you're going to share with the bigger group. And Chris will be able to come in and out each of the groups so that she can help you if you get a little bit stalled in your conversations. But I cannot imagine that happening. So I will hit that magic button now and see you all soon. Okay. Narelle, why are you still with us? You should be gone. Hang on, let me put you in.
Don't go, Narelle.
Doesn't want you in breakout room 1. Hang on, how can I make you go into breakout room 1? There's always something technical that doesn't work. I'm going to move you to breakout room 2 and then I'm going to bring you back, okay?
Oh, wait a minute. The host is inviting you to join breakout room number 1. Do you want me to press join?
Yes, please. Yeah, and hopefully I say goodbye. Yes. So now it's just you and me, Chris. And so what you can do now,
that I need to scoot around, I might just let them do. I mean, from that, I think people seem to have, they were on the move.
I reckon they'll have heaps to talk about. But if you do want to go in and out, you can easily do it. Just let me know and I can join you in and out. And then when you've had enough time, and then you can come back. Oh, Amy's back. Why have we got Amy back? Hello, Amy. No, she's gone again.
All right, now let's just leave them go. If you think they've had enough of a boost and they'll get into conversations, then let's just make that happen.
Sorry, Chris, I just had to go and help Tanya for a second.
That's all right, no worries, I'm just here, so.
Yeah, no, she just put out a SOS for help, so I jumped into.
Oh, okay.
She was a scribe, so I thought I'd better get in and make sure she's right to go.
So we got everybody's okay?
Everybody's in, and well, that group was already talking away. I can check the group map and see how it's going. Yeah, group map 2's got stuff in. Group 1 hasn't yet. Hopefully Narelle's not too far away from going. And Tan's not in properly. So, oh, because she didn't, oh, okay. That's why she couldn't get in it. She hasn't accepted the... So breakout room 1's still doing intros. That's why their group out's not starting to be populated, but group 2's already got stuff in, so they're going well. So I just checked in and Narelle said she's okay, so it won't be too long, but they were still doing intros.
Okay, so our facilitators can report back, yeah? Is that the quickest way of doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Touching the sides of some of the things that you might have talked about and just get a bit of insight as to what your thoughts were the other side of it. So I might start with Geraldine, your group. Can you just give us one or two main points from your group's conversation?
I think probably the big thing that came out of our group was having trust in the people that you're working with and making the most of our local area, whether it's our farming communities, how our farming community, our farms, you know, supply food, build on local businesses, supporting local businesses, educating people about that, and yeah, the diversity in our area. And one of the ways of doing that was maybe trying to set up something with the education department to help our next younger generation know what's out there. Yeah, looking at all the assets of our area and bringing them together in a brochure or something like that. There was lots of others, but that's a brief.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Angela, what came out of your group? A couple of top picks, and if we've already heard them from Geraldine, you probably don't need to go over them again. So what would you like to tell us about, Angela? What did your group have to say?
Okay, we were off on a whole different page from there to a degree. We talked about the enthusiasm that people would probably have coming out of COVID, and fairly keen and eager to get back together. So our challenge could be, as a community, to tap into all of those people and bring them together to maintain, to put together where they want our new lifestyle to take us. I've said that badly. Our lifestyle is one of our strengths, and how do we bring our people together to get these plans shovel ready, like what Bryan spoke about, because there's a lot happening at the moment in the space of health. We talked about strategic planning with the hospital. We need regenerative ideas that will build on what's been planned already and is in the making now. So to pick up on what Christine and Bryan both spoke about, they talked about grabbing that community together, building on a shared vision and maintaining that momentum to see it through in a post-COVID space. So I guess really, our community collaboration.
Really, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. That's, yes, picking up on the enthusiasm post-COVID. Very interesting. Mandy, can you let us know some insights from your group, please?
Oh my God, I wanted to stay in my group for another half an hour. It was such a great group, and we didn't quite get to everyone, but it was such a gorgeous conversation, so thank you. And like a bit of a theme that seems to be emerging is we talked about stopping reacting to things and being proactive, a bit like what Bryan was talking about, and seeing the future and seeing the opportunity. And the deep pride that we all have for our community and how we can articulate that and build a great picture so that we're ready to go. Yeah, it was a great conversation. Narelle, is there anything else I've missed that you went, oh my God, that's brilliant as well? Sorry, just because I was so in it. I wasn't a good facilitator.
Narelle, you're on.
I just think one of the things we talked about as an achievable outcome is creating a network of community leaders, really to be able to, like Mandy said, articulate the pride that we all feel in those shared stories, and to develop our storytellers, I think, is a really important role that we can play. And from there, I loved what Bryan said about, you know, you keep talking the talk, and if all of the community is talking the talk, people become convinced that this is going to be achieved. And that is very true.
Yeah, and I think just that positive, you know, the other thing we talked about was the importance of keeping the vision positive and not to get hung up on the negative stories. You know, you know, we talked a bit about social media and the dangers of that, but that if we can somehow coach each other and support each other to talk about, hey, but what? Listen to this. This is a great idea. Why would we want to sort of, you know, interrupt this with some negativity now when we're actually so on the same path? So really trying to support each other through a network where we can help each other with those conversations, those tough conversations sometimes. That was great for me because that was one part of the problem. You know, at the beginning when I rang Chris, I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Anyway, yeah, that was it. Sorry, Chris.
No. It's just brilliant, and I love your enthusiasm. And I just maybe say one or two things, and then I'm going to hand back to you, Mandy, to close the conversation. And I think one of the really important things, Mandy, that's just come out of what you've just said is, this is one occasion, but the conversation continues. There's no doubt that there's no doubt that you'll run out of words around all of this, which is just wonderful. And of course, in Bryan's story, you might also have realised that words are not enough. In other words, I can think of some communities where there has been talk for a very, very long time and nothing actually shifts, nothing actually moves. So I think there's something about the gift of turning the talk into action. And after listening to all of you and knowing a bit about what you do in your community, I know that that's absolutely possible. So there's just perhaps in closing, maybe just something about the value of small steps. I think that you will have, and you'll be able to actualize some really grand plans and really significant work. So I wish you well in all of that, and I would love to be, of course, part of all of that or get to hear about it. So I think that's really, but there's something about the way in which even small next steps boost people's commitment and enthusiasm. And at times when people are feeling low, and there might be people who feel like that in the community, the big ask might be too big. So there's something about valuing the even small actions and small kindnesses and small urging and small boosts and small vitamin pills that might make a really big difference. You might find a small step in adding one new person to this conversation that isn't here tonight or that doesn't know about it. One new extra person. Think about this, one new young person who basically thinks that so much change in communities happens because of all of you, all of us up on the screen, and it's a grown-up thing. There's just something, and there's a whole other topic, but I have seen the power of young people who are spotters and boosters, and I'm going to say that they spot opportunities and they can actually boost them. And we probably, in lots of instances, don't have enough faith in our young people to make that kind of contribution. So one extra younger person into the network or into the conversation, fabulous different ways of seeing that are really, really valuable. Maybe one extra volunteer. Maybe the story that you tell about the community is just a little bit more powerful, a bit more ramped up, has got a few more verbs in it. Verbs are very helpful because they're all about doing something, about action, about movement, which is so important. And maybe there's one person that you can think of who is tired, worn out, fatigued, cynical, hasn't laughed in a long time. And maybe you could lighten just a little bit one heavy heart, which also sounds very, well, it sounds very old-fashioned and slightly naff. But I've also seen the value in so many communities where just bringing some lightness to people has just made an extraordinary difference, because once you shift people's mindset, they start thinking about possibilities and they can use their imagination. And my mind only works in two speeds. One is it uses memory, and the past is really easy. I can go back there very, very quickly. Imagination's the other one, and that's much harder because I've got to imagine something that's not there yet. And I think, picking up on Angela's point and some of the other points that you've made, trying to imagine and think about and then go for a future in the community that is positive and that's vibrant and that's able to, the next time something comes along and belts you, and that will happen, that you'll be okay the other side of it. So it's finding the cynical, heavy heart and perhaps helping lighten it a bit. And the only other thing I'm going to say is, and this is to Bryan, there's something you said that I don't agree with. And now's the time I shouldn't tell you. And you talked about luck. And I don't believe you. You see, I think that you've made your own luck. I think that really clever, committed, hardworking people like you don't just rely on luck. I think you make your own luck. And I just want to give you credit for doing that, because in the sort of worlds where I've worked, I would never just rely on good luck. I know the difference that people make and their relationships and the trust and the investment in your leadership that brings about change. So that's a kind of heavy compliment, but luck's, nah, I wouldn't rely on luck, friends. I'd rely on Bryan ahead of luck any day. So Mandy, I'm going to hand this to you because you started off the evenings in such a lovely way, and I'm just going to hand over to you. And on the way through, I'm just going to thank you all for letting me be part of your Monday evening. Thank you for your fresh enthusiasm, and I'd really just like to keep my kind of love affair and affection for your part of Victoria alive, and just being in your company tonight's helped me do that. So I'm very grateful for having been in your company on this Monday night. Mandy Hutchinson, I'm glad that you rang me a couple of weeks back, but over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I just want to thank you all for coming along tonight as well. I'm so grateful to, I'll do my thanks first, but to Chris for taking my call and listening to me. As you can only imagine, I did talk for a fair old time as she tried to support me, to guide me, and then, you know, to get this beautiful group of little helpers. I'm going to mention them again: Angela, Geraldine, Bryan, Matt, Laura, Jason, Tanya, Narelle and Stacey, to kind of come along and help build a team around this. And then we've had these most gorgeous conversations tonight, and I feel very inspired. Thank you, Chris and Bryan, for your messages tonight, and thank you for the conversations in our breakout room. I feel really hopeful. I said at the beginning, this is all about hope and strengthening community, and I'm feeling much more hopeful about everything, really. So thank you all. And my lesson, Chris suggested that I try and say something that I might take on myself. And I love the idea of the whole, about the future, about the whole of our Gannawarra community. That yes, we do have little things that are happening in each of our communities, but if we have a vision for the whole, and that we're proactive, not reactive, that we've got a real chance if we can continue to have conversations like this. We actually thought that maybe the next topic of conversation might be about managing change. But I'm actually wondering now, after the conversation we've had tonight, if it's about trying to shift us into that space, about how do we create a whole of community kind of idea. There's been some lovely chats in here about lifestyle and the importance of knowing your neighbours and knowing your leaders and who they are and how we can bring that forward. So that's what I'm going to take away from tonight. We do have another seminar coming up. Now, we were going to have it on the 19th of October, which is another Monday night, but I have come to realise that Kahuna Progress Association are having their AGM that night, which wipes some of us out. So I'm thinking of making it the 26th. Can anyone just tell me if that would be terrible for you? Because I don't want to lose a single one of you along this way. And I also, great, thumbs are up. Lovely, thank you. Great, 26. All right, we're going to go to 26. My little group, I'm hoping you'll help have a quick meeting with me, and we'll co-design the next session with Chris. I can happily announce that Geraldine and Sharon Champion are going to be our guest speakers. They started the Rotary Cambodia Exchanges program. So they're going to tell a bit of their story and share their learnings with us next time, and it'll be designed in the way of the theme of the night. And the other thing I want to challenge you to do, as I think Tanya's mentioned in the chat, is to bring someone with you next time. I'm trying for some young people as well. I'll try and get one of my kids along, and bring someone with you, and let's have another discussion in a couple of weeks, and let's see where this goes and how it grows. I think that's probably it from me. But I think the other thing Tanya did mention here is that some people don't recognise their leaders. And I think there's so many people who are leaders in our community who don't even realise it. And I think Chris started in her presentation tonight about people who are leaders, and they just suddenly happen, these amazing people. Let's have a deep think about those people around, and let's bring them along on this journey with us, and let's create a positive, hopeful, strengthened community for the future. Anyway, that's enough, I think. Is that enough, Chris? Right. Okay. And I think, Julie, is there anything you want to... Oh, I have not acknowledged Julie, who's a bloody star. Julie, thank you so much for doing the backbone tonight and putting us into the rooms and adding little conversations along the way. Is there anything you want to just finish off with, Julie, just to make sure we're all right?
Yeah, I'm always a big believer in feedback, and already a couple of items have come through on the chat. But if anyone else has got any feedback, either on how we can make these conversations even more awesome than they were tonight, but also other ideas like Mandy's just mentioned a couple of ideas, but something when we were talking last week about these was any ideas from you guys about what would make a great Gannawarra conversation. So 2 things. So if you've got any feedback for us on how we can do maybe things better or differently, and any other great conversation topics. That's it from me.
Thank you all. Thanks, Julie, and thanks everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Stay well. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye. See ya.